From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, out of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock with this week's cattle market segment. Among other things, she'll discuss the significant decline in feeder cattle price volatility. Also, K-State's Bob Weaber will preview the 2018 K-State Ranching Summit, set for a couple of weeks from now, which will be centered on the theme Beef 2030. Later then, from the Farm Service Agency, Kitra Cooper reports that nominations for this year's county FSA Committee Elections are due this Wednesday. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Sarah Keatley about 4-H youth preparing their projects for the Kansas State Fair. That's our lineup on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and once again, thanks for tuning in for Agriculture Today. On this week's cattle market segment, we introduce a new voice to this series, and she is with the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver, a project co-sponsored, to remind you, by numerous land-grant universities, including K-State. She's the relatively new senior economist with the LMIC, Katelyn McCullock. So, Katelyn, thanks, first of all, for availing yourself for this visit, and let folks know a bit about your background, if you would.
Sure. So I've been covering the livestock markets for about 10 years now, and I actually started my career right here at the Livestock Marketing Information Center as a dairy economist, and I was here about 5 years before doing some other things with Farm Credit out in New England, and then most recently I was at American Farm Bureau Federation as a livestock economist there.
Glad to have you at LMIC once more. Talking about the trades, and then we'll get into some interesting information on the LMIC.info website on feeder cattle market volatility. The cash fed cattle trade this past week, you do have some numbers to share which carry a bullish tone to them.
Yep, so the 5 market fed steer price brought 110.10 this week. That's $3 per hundredweight below last week and about 6% lower than last year's price, which was about $119.50 per hundredweight. Now, the cash prices are still leading the futures for the Kansas markets, and these basis levels are slightly stronger than historical levels at this time. Packer margins are fairly strong, even though they've come down from highs seen earlier this year in May and June. The latest data also shows heifer slaughter numbers are quite strong and hit the highest week of the year last week, 16% above last year in a single week.
So it seems as if the fed cattle market has certainly found its footing. Do you read it that way?
It certainly seems like we've hit what would be considered the lowest levels of the year. We're expecting modest gains through the fourth quarter of this year and somewhat higher gains headed into next year.
What did we see on the boxed beef trade this past week, Katelyn?
So the cutout value finished the week slightly higher towards the end of this week. The weekly average was stable to just above the prior week at $204.83 per hundredweight, trailing slightly from a year ago by about 1%. And some of this is that retail margins have remained very good on the beef side. Competing meat supplies continue to have an attractive look in the meat case, with all meat products being relatively inexpensive relative to each other. Still, we've seen inventories build up in cold storage relative to these higher production levels. You
do have some fresh, new cold storage numbers from the USDA. You might elaborate on those and tell us what those are saying to us.
The poultry section of the cold storage report was decidedly negative. That's where we've really seen inventories continue to build month over month. And the month of June, compared to a month ago, was up 6%, and relative to last year was up 3%. Red meat did fare slightly better. It was up about 5% compared to a year ago and down 7% from the month of May. Now, one of the big mentions that I took away from the cold storage report was that there were no changes to the overall total frozen pork stocks relative to a year ago, and they actually worked down about 10% from May. Now, this is the first month we would really start to see some of those tariff impacts from Mexico, even though it's still early. I take this as a positive sign that we didn't have a massive increase this month. Beef, on the other side, rose about 8% compared to a year ago, but is down 3% compared to May. Bone-in beef cuts were up 31% compared to a year ago and 7% compared to last year, but boneless beef increased about 6% and fell 4% compared to last month. Now, when we look at total red meat and poultry, this is really the third consecutive month that total tonnage has exceeded 2.5 billion pounds. Last month set a record, and we've come off a little bit from that high. These cold storage levels are relative to the large supplies we've seen across hog, cattle, and poultry sectors and are likely to build in the coming months as more production comes online, as well as these tariffs are starting to take a more full effect. Chicken in particular is expected to have the largest production quarter on record in the third quarter of 2018, and so that's something we're looking at on the horizon. And a lot of that growth is likely to end up in frozen inventories as opposed to exports, which have been less than stellar this year, especially compared to other meat sectors. They're up about 1% year to date. Now, competing meats and higher levels across the board do have the potential to weigh on demand for beef at the retail level, but we think the relative macro economy is going to play a larger role than what those competing meats are because those prices are somewhat inexpensive compared to relative time frames. Beef is still more expensive than pork and chicken, but we see a lot of featuring, and beef isn't actually that high in terms of a historical retail price. Now, that's not to say the trade picture won't change or impact beef, but the larger concern, I think, for beef at this point is maintaining consumer demand through those larger macroeconomic signals.
Well, the more immediate litmus test, if you will, on beef demand would be in these coming weeks. Normally, we see purchases for the Labor Day holiday coming in the month of August. So will this be a telltale stretch on beef demand in that respect, Katelyn?
I think it's always interesting to see right before a big holiday how packers have bought, what their inventories look like, what their supply chain looks like. I think from a bigger industry perspective, we already know there's a lot of cattle out there and a lot of beef in the pipeline. And so near term, what the cutout does and the wholesale meat cuts are going to be more indicative of how those supply chains have really lined up between retail and packer.
And then you have the wild card of trade issues. Nobody knows where all of that is headed. So it does lend that uncertainty.
It does.
Let's also get into, once again, an article that is on the lmic.info website this month. You and colleagues crunched some numbers on the volatility in the feeder cattle cash market. And that volatility, which has been notable in recent years, toned down some. Tell us what you have here, Katelyn.
So the LMIC analysts, we did a price analysis of the Oklahoma City 750 to 800-pound steers over the first 26 weeks of this year. Now, the price range from 2017, so that's top to bottom, what the highs and lows were about $34.82 a hundredweight, compared to this year's only $17.77 a hundredweight. Now, this year is not just smaller compared to last year, but it's actually looking like it's going to be the smallest range since 2012 over that same 26-week period. We also took a look at what the price swings are on an annual basis, so using those monthly numbers in an aggregate form all the way back to 1992. And the typical price swing between 1992 to 2002 was under $20 a hundredweight. But in the last 5 years, we've seen swings much larger than that. In a couple of years, over $70 per hundredweight in some years. So 2018, compared to some of the last 5 years, is really looking a lot less volatile, and the magnitude so far for the first half of the year is under $10 a hundredweight on that monthly basis.
So this is a significant change, isn't it? In fact, it's rather striking how little, comparatively, the volatility is right now vis-a-vis recent years.
That's right. It does seem like the first half of the year we've really seen volatility calm down, but we still have half a year left, and I guess things can change.
So as you share this information, what should producers read out of it? Does it allow them a little more assurance as to their pricing and their marketing plans?
Well, as they say in the stock market, previous returns and previous risk aren't necessarily indicative of future risk.
Right.
But what we can say is when we look at where heavyweight feeder cattle prices have been, we've seen them bolstered in the last couple of weeks by inexpensive feed costs that are looking like they're going to be on the horizon. we look at that and we feed that all together to say that we're expecting right now for those prices to remain relatively steady through the remainder of 2018. But if you look at that on a year-over-year basis, that will still mean probably a loss in the fourth quarter relative to a year ago, but probably similar prices to where we are today. On the lighter weight cattle side, so calf prices in the Southern Plains, they're holding pretty steady compared to a year ago at this point, but we are expecting those prices to lose momentum this fall and will likely be below a year ago as well.
All right. Well, producers, once again, take a look at that article on the pareback and feeder cattle price volatility on the lmic.info website. By the way, they have additional articles on the latest USDA red meat and poultry export numbers and a write-up on the USDA's most recent crop acreage report and how that plays into the favor of the cattle production sector. lmic.info. So, Katelyn, looking ahead to this trading week directly before us, it would seem that in the absence of anything dramatic coming along, the signs point to, a fairly even keel in the markets.
I would expect prices to remain relatively stable. Of course, we can't foresee what kind of news will come out or trade-type issue might hit the markets, but we're expecting relatively stable prices through this period.
Very good. Well, Katelyn, a pleasure, and looking forward to working with you on this weekly series on the cattle trades. We appreciate your time and your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Katelyn McCullock, Senior Economist with the Livestock Marketing Information Center in Denver, and sharing those thoughts on cattle market factors with us on Agriculture Today. Well, the cattle production team out of the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State have once more come up with an exceptional informational program for you cow-calf producers, which is set to go 2 weeks from this Wednesday. It's the annual K-State Ranching Summit, and we'll have all the particulars on that, including early registration, which is being taken now. That is next, here on the K-State Radio Network. Keep it right here.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Beef cattle producers, a very important event put on your behalf, is coming up in the middle part of August. This is the 2018 K-State Ranching Summit for you cow-calf producers, others involved in that sector of the industry. For a full preview now, Bob Weaber has rejoined us, cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's one of those instrumental in putting this event on every year. To refresh us on the mission of this particular get-together, Bob, you try to cover quite some territory important to the cow-calf producer in each of these summits, right?
Right. So a couple of years ago, our beef extension team here at K-State got together and we wanted to put together a meeting really focused on sort of the business side and the skill set of managers in beef producing operations, primarily cow-calf operations, but certainly topical content suitable for a range of other producers, whether that's seed stock or stocker background, feedlot, et cetera, but really focused on sort of the business and management skills of our producers.
It's an excellent program, and you mentioned producers because weaved into the agenda are several hands-on producers who will be testifying as to what's working for them.
Right. And so this year's meeting is titled Beef 2030, Pursuing Technology, Transparency, and Profitability. We thought it'd be really helpful if we sort of highlighted some success stories and some folks that we think maybe have their head around, how to drive their business and their business decisions to sort of capture and leverage the value of a variety of technology. We've invited invited, and Mark Gardner's graciously agreed to be our leadoff speaker. So Mark's one of the principal members of the Gardner family at Ashland and Gardner Angus Ranch. And Mark's going to talk about their organization's view on pursuing, adopting, and leveraging technology. So they've, as a family and a business, have a long history of looking at the horizon and seeing changes in our business and technologies that might help them make better decisions and incorporate those. So, ultrasound technology was one that early on the Gardners adopted as a way to improve carcass merit in their animals, and certainly were leaders in that arena for a very long time, have been instrumental in sort of helping us think about genomics and selection technologies. And so Mark's going to talk about kind of how they approach those new technologies and engage them in their business.
And you will follow Mark's presentation with yet another producer from the northeastern part of Oklahoma.
Right. So Tyson Johnson, Sooner Cattle Company, is going to join us. They're based out of Pawhuska, Oklahoma. One of the really core skill sets that we think is important for kind of these more progressive cow-calf operations, really concerned about profitability, is some managerial accounting skills. And that sounds really exciting, I know, to the audience, but we've leaned on Tyson because he's a producer. He understands the importance of those management decision-making tools. So Tyson's going to come and talk to us about sort of what he views as the key numbers for ranch managers to keep a tab on the various aspects of their business, whether that's revenue streams or cost centers in their business, to really help make better decisions from the managerial perspective.
Outstanding. And then the morning portion of the day-long program is rounded out with an individual representing the financial sector. He'll take a look at consumer trends.
Right. So Don Close, many of people in the audience may be familiar with Don. He's done a fair bit of writing over the last few years about our business and sort of the economic position that we have in beef production. Don's with Rabo Agri-Finance and based out of St. Louis. But he's been doing a fair bit of work looking at some of the disruptions that technology is having on our consumers, and principally looking at the demographics of beef consumers, where we might be in 2030. And then he's done some research looking at the impact of food delivery businesses, so things like Blue Apron and others that, you go online and you order a meal kit. It shows up at your house. It's got all the ingredients. And Don's been thinking about, well, how does beef fit in that, and what do consumers expect about beef products in those kinds of meal kits? And so kind of an interesting perspective on who our next generation of consumers is and what they might demand out of our products.
Then the beef lunch, of course, on site. The afternoon program will consist of what, Bob? Sure.
Our afternoon, we wanted to sort of take a look at disruptive technologies. And so disruptive technologies are really ones that we think will have some significant change in our business, or motivate some significant changes in the way we do business. And so Dr. Tom Field from the Engler Center at the University of Nebraska is going to come and talk about disruptive technologies in the beef industry and kind of give us an overview of how we as business managers might approach those. And he's going to give some examples of things that he think will really have big impacts in our business over the coming years, and how we might go about leveraging those for our benefit.
And then K-State specialists will lend their thoughts to that
right.
very
So
topic
we've got
as well.
A few folks that we're blessed to have on staff and work with. Dr. Megan Rolfe from Animal Science and Industry is a geneticist, genomics person, and she's going to talk and give us a little bit of an overview of genome editing. So many producers and folks in the audience have probably heard about CRISPR, and she's going to give us a little overview of kind of the idea behind CRISPR. We're not going to get a dissertation level discussion on it, but an idea of what genome editing has in store for us as producers and how we might think about that as a technology moving forward. We'll follow that with an example of big data. So we think about all the information that's collected from a variety of sources on the internet, whether that's Twitter feeds or Facebook data. Well, we wanted to provide an example from a livestock sector that demonstrates the utility of capturing large amounts of information and then using technology to make that into actionable information for decision making. And so Luis Mendonca is a faculty member in our department, is actually a dairy scientist and focuses a lot on reproductive performance and metabolic performance of dairy cows under heat stress. And he and a number of colleagues have built a system whereby they capture a lot of animal level data from dairies via their software, analyze that data, and provide a dashboard and a benchmarking process for dairy farmers to make better management decisions. So the idea of taking vast amounts of data, processing it, and then delivering it as a tool with actionable items, make better management decisions.
And obviously that's applicable to the beef cattle sector.
Right.
So.
This is a good example of that sort of process. And I think the beef sector has been one that's not been touched much by precision ag kind of ideas. And certainly data capture and data analysis is one that, moving forward, ideas like blockchain, for example, are ones where we can leverage data from across the industry to inform our individual management decisions.
Well, then, rounding out this summit, you'll have an individual also based here in the state of Kansas and a high-profile operation in the industry. We'll get back to that overarching theme for the summit of what's ahead by the year 2030 and being ready for it.
Yeah, so John Butler with Innovative Livestock Services and the Beef Marketing Group here in Manhattan is going to talk to us about his vision for the beef industry in 2030. So John's been very engaged in U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We've asked John to sort of step back and say, if you were king for the day, what changes would you make in the beef sector to better position us to meet consumer demand by 2030? And so this is kind of everything's on the table. Give us your view of where we need to go and what we need to do to be more profitable, more sustainable by 2030. So we think that'll be a really interesting discussion. I suspect there'll be some discussion in there about traceability, transparency of our production system to our consumer. Certainly product attributes moving forward will be a key part of that. So I'm really excited about John's talk as well.
Overall, this will be a quite rewarding day on the 15th of August. That is a Wednesday on the K-State campus. And in that's not all that long from now. It's time that producers intending on attending line out their reservations, right?
Right. So we've got an online registration portal built. If you just go to ksubeef.org and see there's under the events tab and listing over on the right-hand side, the KSU Ranching Summit, and you can register online. You get a little discount if you get that done by August 8th. We'll take walk-up registrants as well. Discount if you bring two people from the same operation. So encourage you to go check that out. Register early, though. That will, if you're planning on coming, save the money and help us do a good job making sure we've got meal counts and the like done. So if you'll do that by August 8th, we'll be deeply appreciative.
The best of luck with this program. It's an outstanding agenda that you put together here, Bob. So thank you for the quick look ahead to it.
Great, Eric. Thanks. And we look forward to seeing lots of Kansans and folks from surrounding states attend our meeting.
And what he's talking about, once again, is the 2018 K-State Ranching Summit, Wednesday, August the 15th at the Alumni Center here on the Kansas State University campus. All details, including the registration procedure, at ksubeef.org. That's one of the co-organizers of this event, Bob Weaber, cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. And important information for all agricultural producers in Kansas who are involved in the USDA programs to whatever extent through the Farm Service Agency. The FSA County Committee election process is underway. There's a key deadline associated with that in a couple of days, as a matter of fact, which we want to remind you about. Kitra Cooper is by our way once again. She's the Public Relations and Outreach Specialist with the state FSA headquarters here in Manhattan, and she manages the county committee election process at the state level. August the 1st is this coming Wednesday. That is the final date to nominate potential committee members, right?
Yes. Nominations are accepted through close of business at your county office on August 1st, which is Wednesday. You can nominate another person if you'd like. You can also self-nominate. So if you're interested in running for your local county committee election and want to be on the ballot this fall, you can easily nominate yourself. We have a nomination form that's required to do that. You can get that from your county office. You can also pull it off of our website. It's a very short form, easy to fill out, just requires your signature and a little bit of information.
The responsibilities of the county committee, they're rather extensive. We see occasions where they act on an emergency basis and they conduct routine business as well, right?
They do many things. One of the most recent examples statewide is the release of certain CRP practices for emergency haying and grazing due to the continued drought situations. The decision to request that CRP be opened for hay and graze comes directly from each county committee. County committees also make decisions on average commodity yields in each county, which are used for price support programs. They can make other emergency program decisions, such as deciding whether to request emergency conservation program assistance, which we have used recently for wildfires. Mm-hmm. They also hear appeals from producers.
That would have to do with any concerns over USDA payments or discrepancies.
Right. Sometimes some anomalies or things happen with sign-up, and maybe producers don't always get things enrolled quite like they thought they did, or maybe didn't understand the program, and we have to make some sort of adverse decision, and the producers can appeal that decision, and they appeal directly to the county committee.
Who is eligible to be nominated, technically speaking?
Well, most of our county committees are made up of 3 local producers. Each county is divided into 3 different local administrative areas, and those are supposed to be representative of the population and the makeup of our producers. So the committee's made up of 3 members. First eligibility is that you have to live in the local administrative area, or LAA as we call it, that is up for election that year. Other eligibility requirements are that the nominee be of eligible voting age, which would be 18. They also have to participate or cooperate with FSA in programs. And by cooperate, that means that you're just active on our records, and you may not be participating right now, but you have in the past and plan to in the future. What that does is make sure that we have people on the committee who are aware of what's going on in the county. You are knowledgeable about farming and the local ag practices. You are up on current weather and how it's affecting the producers in your area. And that's the kind of information we need for our committees to make the best decisions for their producers.
Are there any restrictions to the nominations whatsoever?
There are some restrictions, and we run into this every year. You know, busy people just get busier, right?
Right.
So our county committee members tend to be the folks who are involved in other boards and other community activities and organizations. But we do have some restrictions in that our county committee members cannot be elected to any type of partisan office. They also cannot hold a national or functional level position with any kind of specialty or commodity-based ag organization. They cannot be involved in the sale or marketing or adjustment of crop insurance policies. As you can see, this is all leaning toward conflict of interest, right? So those are the types of things that we watch out for that can make someone ineligible to be a county committee member.
And it's understandable how that might be overlooked in the process.
Yes, easily overlooked.
And one thing just quickly that comes to mind, it's not a complete turnover of the committees each year, is it? It's just individuals within the committee.
Yep, we rotate one member at a time. So we have an election every year for each local administrative area. The terms are 3-year terms. We have a 3-term limit. Typically, people get elected and they stay on the entire time. We have a really good group of experienced, dedicated committee members out there. We're very appreciative for the work that they do.
Well, it is something of a routine process, but it remains as critical as ever year upon year upon year. That is the makeup of that county FSA committee and all of the responsibilities that it oversees. So, Kitra, thank you for coming by and reminding us of this important business.
Thanks, Eric.
She is Kitra Cooper from the Farm Service Agency State Headquarters for Kansas. Go to this web address for full information, fsa.usda.gov/elections, or once more, strike up a conversation about it with your local Farm Service Agency personnel. Now, this week's edition of Tree Tales. Here's K-State Forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Did you know that trees played an important part in Kansas history? The first American explorers labeled the Great Plains area the Great American Desert. They were coming from the eastern states, and they thought that if this land could not support dense, tall forests, then it must be too infertile or too dry to grow crops. Of course, now this region is the world's breadbasket due to our productive croplands. As early settlers crossed the Kansas prairie, they usually headed for cottonwood trees to make camp in the evening. The tall trees were important landmarks, which could be seen for miles over the grassy landscape. They knew that a grove of cottonwoods usually indicated that water was present too, and the shade was welcome shelter from the hot prairie sun, while the fallen limbs were used for firewood. The cottonwood is the official Kansas state tree. In southeastern Kansas and Lynn and Bourbon counties flow Sugar Creek and the town of Mapleton, both named for the sugar maples that can still be found growing in the valleys and north-facing slopes of this area. In the mid and late 1800s, there was an active maple sugaring operations there, like we see in Michigan and Vermont today. Many of the larger rivers in Kansas, like the Delaware, Kansas, Smoky Hill, Republican, and Saline rivers, had extensive groves of timber growing on their banks, but much of these bottomland forests were cut for timber or cleared for agricultural crops. This has led to some unstable stream banks in many areas and resulted in muddy water and increased siltation in our reservoirs. Replacing these streamside trees, now called riparian buffers, is an important conservation practice promoted by state agencies and the USDA. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, a forester for K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. And after the break, Jeff Wickman at the microphone with this week's Kansas 4-H segment here on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. It's county fair season across Kansas, and the Kansas State Fair in Hutchinson is fast approaching. The State Fair begins on September 6th and runs through the 17th. Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley says this is the time of year when Kansas 4-H youth are not only participating in local county fairs, but also getting ready for the state fair.
Yeah, it is, Jeff. Right now, all of our 4-Hers across the state are participating in their county fairs, and as they're participating in their county fairs, they're qualifying to enter into the Kansas State Fair. So each county has their own guidelines on what it takes to qualify to get to the Kansas State Fair, and if they meet those guidelines, they want to check with their local extension agent right away to see what they need to do to sign up so that they can enter in the Kansas State Fair.
And while those may be different from county to county. They're all looking for some of the best exhibits, the best livestock.
They are, especially in the static exhibits. Those exhibits qualify based upon the ribbon color that they receive and based upon what each local extension unit has as far as rules and regulations about what can qualify for the Kansas State Fair. But not every exhibit at a county fair does qualify to come on to the Kansas State Fair. Like you said, it is those that really meet the requirements and far exceed those.
Talk a little bit about what the agents do then in terms of getting things lined up for the state fair.
So right now, our local extension staff are working hard in their county fairs, and as they get those exhibits that are ready to come to the state fair, they enter those into our system that we use for the Kansas State Fair. And then from there, the state and area staff really take the role along with all of our volunteers to get all of those exhibits lined up to come to the Kansas State Fair.
You mentioned static exhibits. What falls into that category?
That's a great question. So our static exhibits are exhibits that essentially don't move. Your woodworking, your foods and nutrition, your clothing and textiles, your entomology exhibits, all of those are considered static exhibits. For the state fair, though, you will also want to enter through your local extension unit and through the state 4-H office your horse, your dog, your rabbits, your poultry, and your dairy cattle and your dairy goats. I know it seems like a little bit of an odd mixture there, but those are the entries that need to come through your local extension unit to the state 4-H office.
So some of those like photography and clothing are not going to change from the county fair to the state fair. You'll go with the same exhibit.
Yes, so those exhibits will be the same. The clothing, the entomology boxes, the geology boxes, entries that you'll want to keep making, your foods and nutrition, your vegetables for horticulture exhibits, all of those will be different exhibits that were submitted at the county fair but come to the Kansas State Fair.
Now, when it comes to the foods, I've often wondered, you've got something that did really well at the county fair. The recipe turned out great. You make it for the state fair. Do you sample part of that so you know that it's what you want?
They don't sample it necessarily. If you're making cookies, you can have a cookie, but that's not going to be one of the exhibits that you bring to the fair. But our judges at the state fair, they do sample those. So exhibitors are choosing those entries based upon the appearance, the smell, the texture, just a visual look instead of a taste.
We've talked about that in the past on some of our other shows about the judging process, but it really is a process.
It is. At a lot of our county fairs, there is conference judging with the youth. So the youth are able to sit down with the judge and they are able to visit about their project, how they got to where they got, some challenges that they had, some successes that they had. At the Kansas State Fair, we do not necessarily have that opportunity just because we take in almost 10,000 exhibits and we judge between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. or until we're done on that first Friday. And so while we don't have the opportunity to have that conference judging, a lot of our youth receive written comments back that our judges write, or we have volunteers write for the judges as they're judging those.
What are some of your responsibilities during the state fair? Because really state 4-H is responsible for all of this.
Right. So it's not just myself. It's those who work with me in our state 4-H office and also our area extension offices. And so my responsibility is to oversee the entry process, oversee the volunteer entries, make sure everybody receives tickets and entry cards. And then once we get to the state fair, I assist with the data entry and I manage those people who do our data entry for us. So every 15 minutes, our website is updated with new results so that we have lifetime results that you can get while you're at the state fair.
And where do they post all of those results?
At kansas4h.org. And they will be on our main page. You just click a button, and then you can search by first name, by last name, by local extension unit, by department. So lots of different ways to search, and you can see immediately. If you sent your cake down in the morning, you can see by 5 p.m. what ribbon it received.
Great way for the local community to stay in touch, too, because most people will go to the fair for 1 or 2 days, but not for the entire run.
Right, and especially with our foods exhibits, we have almost 2,000 food items that come to the state fair to be judged, and so we don't have room to display all 2,000 entries for the foods. And so what we do is we pick food that comes through that is representative of what the foods were that we received throughout the day. And so those are on display. But many people who come don't find their item, and that's just because we had to sell it at the food sale. On that first Friday and the first Saturday, we have a food sale. And so their food was most likely sold, but in the meantime, they can get those results, and their comment sheets will be back at their local extension unit.
And hard to believe that the county fair season is about half over, and it won't be long before state fair season rolls around.
Right. I think we're just at 40 days before the state fair is here.
That's Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley discussing the preparations for Kansas 4-H youth and staff ahead of the Kansas State Fair, which begins September 6th and runs through the 17th in Hutchinson. Again, for more information, visit kansas4h.org or contact your local extension office. Now here's a rundown of the county fairs being held this week and next. The Butler County Fair in El Dorado and Graham County Fair in Hill City run through Wednesday. The Jefferson County Fair in Valley Falls continues through Thursday. County fairs opening multi-day runs this week include the Sherman County Northwest Kansas Free Fair in Goodland, Johnson County Fair in Gardner, Anderson County Fair in Garnett, Douglas County Fair in Lawrence, Republic County North Central Kansas Free Fair in Belleville, Cheyenne County Fair in St. Francis, Crawford County Fair in Girard, Greeley County Fair in Tribune, Rush County Fair in La Crosse, Franklin County Fair in Lane, the Elk County Longton Free Fair in Longton, and the Lynn County Fair in Mound City. A complete list of fairs and run dates can be found at kansas4h.org under the What's Hot heading. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. To listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.